Okay, everybody. Welcome. My name is Ben Thurston. I'm the planning director with Baseline Engineering. I'm sure I'm not the first person to welcome you to the conference, but let me be maybe the third person to welcome you to the conference. I'm going to briefly introduce this session. It's one of the benefits that we get as a sponsor of APA. We're the platinum sponsor. We've been the platinum or elite sponsor for at least the last half dozen years, and we do it because we think it's important to support APA and to give back. And so I'm going to tell you just briefly, real quick about Baseline, and then talk a little bit about this session, why I picked it to sponsor and to introduce. Baseline's an employee-owned multidisciplinary consultant that provides planning, landscape architecture, survey, civil engineering, water and wastewater, and environmental services. Our team of about 80 professionals provides services to both the public sector and private sector from 4 offices in Golden, Steamboat Springs, Loveland, and Colorado Springs. And so this session, at its core is about water conservation, and the history of water conservation really goes back as far as the history of civilization, if you think about it. And the relative importance of conservation has ebbed and flowed over time with advancements in finding, conveying, storing, and treating water. And today, with the observed impacts of climate change and the drought conditions that have been experienced, water conservation is perhaps more important now than at any time in history. And so that's why I think that this is such an important session. Even though we don't necessarily do a lot of work in water conservation, our landscape architecture team really is passionate about it and wants to be at the forefront of writing smart codes on this subject. We haven't done a lot, but I think it's just so vastly important that that's why I chose to introduce it. So with that, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that great introduction. Very appropriate. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Waverly Klaw. I'm the director of the Growing Water Smart program for the Sonoran Institute. Welcome to the second of 3 themed Growing Water Smart workshops for this afternoon. For those of you who joined us this morning, earlier this afternoon, time's going quickly. We really talked with local governments and land use planners on the opportunities that they have for integrating water into land use plans and policies. And today I'm really thrilled to present 3 excellent panelists today to talk more on the development side and kind of what does water-wise development actually look like, and how beautiful is it, and how exciting is it to integrate drought-resilient approaches to our development into kind of the way that we build in our communities. So I want to introduce Marianne Eppig. She is the Director of Resilience for the Urban Land Institute, and she'll be talking about a brand new publication that they have out on strategies for drought-resilient development. We have Bill Wenk with us, the founder of Wenk Associates, who has a deep history with and understanding of landscape design to further our priorities around water. And we have Brock Smethels, the president of Sterling Ranch Development Company, who has put many of these concepts into action in his developments. So without further ado, I'm going to present some quick context setting, and some of this may look similar if you were in the first session, but it's equally important to tee up the conversations that these panelists are going to be having today. So, we've all been seeing in the news that the West is facing serious and worsening drought to the point where we can't necessarily look at drought as kind of an isolated event, a period of bad years that will then return us to our original snowpack levels or precipitation. We're really entering a period of aridification in the West, and we need to acknowledge that and work on how that impacts the way that our communities develop and redevelop. This pretty severe period of drought is really exacerbating water levels throughout the Colorado River. And many of our communities in Colorado rely on Colorado River water, and we're seeing greater and greater tiers of cuts being issued by the Bureau of Reclamation as our waters in our reservoirs are shrinking to 25% of their total capacity. At the same time, we are seeing that Colorado and other states in the West are growing. We know that this is creating additional pinches in our communities. We added almost 1 million new residents between 2010 and 2020, and we're projected to grow to 6.5 million people by 2030, which I just checked is less than 8 years from now. So this is happening quickly, and water is playing a major role in the way that our communities are developing. The Colorado Water Conservation Board also confirmed that based on several different scenarios, we will be seeing a gap between the water supply that our municipalities have and the demand that's projected of between 250,000 up to 750,000 acre feet per year by 2030. So this is a growing gap. And much of our, oh, sorry about these arrows here, much of our impact has to do with how we grow, whether we embrace adaptive approaches to our new development, or we grow with water in mind, or whether we kind of ignore that side of things and continue to move forward as usual. And the gap between water supply and demand projected exists in every basin in Colorado. So it's not a particular issue for a particular place. It's something that all of us as communities have to be considering. So just quickly, Growing Water Smart is the program that I manage, and we empower local leaders to implement plans and policies that support community and regional water resilience. And the way that we focus our attention is by kind of turning from the supply side of kind of acquiring more water and sort of addressing issues of stormwater by piping it as quickly away from our communities as possible, toward a view of demand side reductions, sort of incorporating conservation, efficiency, and reuse into our developments. And also to really look at low impact development or green infrastructure as ways to work more in concert with nature and to infiltrate our stormwater rather than piping it away. And we do that by involving many people in these conversations. It's not only the land use planners or the water resource managers, it's not only the developers or the consultants, it's not only the elected officials, but everyone talking with one another and coming up with the strategies and approaches that will make our communities more resilient to existing and future water issues. And our communities will benefit in more ways than one. That impacts cost of water, that impacts resilience to natural hazards like drought, wildfire, flooding, and it enhances our ecosystems to be more resilient in the future. And Marianne's really going to dig into many of the approaches that the Urban Land Institute identified for making development more water-wise and more drought resilient. But you know, the Sonoran Institute, we talk a lot about these different buckets of opportunities that we have. Integrating water into the way that we plan our futures in the long range, looking at whether developments have adequate water supply or what some of the creative approaches are to embedding conservation and efficiency into new development. Looking at our land use policies, particularly at our landscaping policies, our plumbing and building codes, and the way that we are developing the urban form in our communities to be more water smart. And also to look at the underlying issues of watershed health in our communities. How can we, like I said, promote the low-impact development and green infrastructure approaches in our new development and integrate it into our existing development. And demand management for development that already exists can also look like retrofitting appliances and landscapes for buildings that are already there in our community. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Marianne to dig a little bit further into these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Waverly. Thank you for setting the stage for this conversation about development. I'm Marianne Eppig. I'm the Director of Resilience for the Urban Land Institute, and I'm the lead author for our recent report called Water-Wise Strategies for Drought Resilient Development. So this report is available for free online, so if you would like to check it out, please do. You can find it on ULI's Knowledge Finder website. You can also just Google ULI Water-Wise and you'll find it. But this report introduces the challenges associated with drought and provides best practices for real estate and land use professionals to address them. It includes the science behind drought and its impacts, the business case for water-smart real estate development and landscaping, strategies and best practices for addressing water scarcity through water-smart development and landscaping, public sector policies and practices that can support responsible water use, and profiles of water-smart developments and their outcomes that are replicable. So Waverly did touch a lot on why being water-wise matters. I mean, we're experiencing more frequent, intense, and longer droughts that last longer, essentially, than ever before. And this is expected to continue with climate change, and it leads to many issues, including regional wildfires, flooding, and erosion, among other things. So this is really important to focus on. But what I have on my slide here today is the business case of how do we really, incentivize developers and others in the land use professions to take this on. And there's quite a bit to benefit from. Investing in water efficiency and conservation at the site scale mitigates the risks of water shortages, policy changes, and rising water prices. And it also garners water and energy cost savings, providing long-term value. And upfront investment in water and energy efficiency measures increases asset value, in some cases by 10% or more. And the reason why I connect water and energy is because they are linked. Whenever you turn on the faucet, that's using a lot of energy. So the savings really do add up over time. And on top of this, consumers are increasingly showing a preference for water-efficient fixtures, appliances, buildings, and landscapes, especially in drought-prone regions like ours. So I don't have time today to cover all of the strategies and best practices that are in the report, but I'm just going to give you a very high-level overview, and if you have questions about any of them, please bring them back up during the Q&A or come talk to me afterwards, or pick up the report. I'd love that. In terms of pre-development, the overall takeaway here is that compact, walkable, infilled, and water-efficient development accommodates that growth that we were talking about without significantly increasing the burden on the local water system. So the strategies in the pre-development section that we talk about are that kind of water-smart site selection, water adequacy requirements, financing and underwriting water efficiency improvements, and then water-smart design and construction. And I'll get into some of that through the next slides as well. Indoor water use in the U.S. has significantly decreased in the last 2 decades because of the increased efficiency of water fixtures and appliances, but there's still a long way to go. A lot of buildings still have those older fixtures in them. So yeah, don't ignore the existing properties. There's quite a bit of ground to make up. That will result in significant savings across development types. Strategies in our indoor strategies section includes smart metering and sub-metering, leak detection and repair, water efficient fixtures and appliances, and water reuse. And you can see on this chart that we have different water sources that are usually available in a typical urban building for water reuse. So that's really exciting. Outdoor strategies, Bill will be digging into some of these after I talk, but they include everything from soil preparation to native and drought-tolerant plants, installation and maintenance of water-efficient irrigation systems, green infrastructure, and permeable hardscapes. And these have a variety of benefits, not only reducing water demand, but also productively using stormwater, decreasing flood risk, and recharging groundwater in local ecosystems, which is critical when you're in a drought situation. And then in terms of ongoing management, one concern that we heard by many developers is that they could create the most water efficient property in the world, but without appropriate operations and maintenance, the property will lose its water efficiency over time. So we need to promote ongoing maintenance and operations for water efficiency. And the way we do that is through education and communication with property owners, managers, tenants, and others. And that's really the best way to reduce the water footprint of real estate over time. We also looked at public sector policies and practices that can support responsible water use. If you were here during the last session, you heard some of these, but in this report, we really dig into what they are, why they work, and why they're probably the ones that are included in the report will get cross-sector support. But I'll just touch on them briefly here, and again, if you have questions about them, we're happy to talk about them later. But the main point here is that public officials at all levels of government are increasingly recognizing drought as an existential threat to their communities and are enacting drought-related policies to address water stress. You'll see some of the headlines that are from this year. And to support sound policymaking, we recommend water and land use planning integration. If this interests you, talk to Waverly about the Growing Water Smart workshops. They're excellent. And they really bring together those water and land use professionals to talk to each other and develop the policies that make sense for their communities. Water loss control is the fancy terminology for stopping leaks. Huge percentages of water are lost in our water distribution system, so that's something to look at. Regional water reuse, as opposed to just, counting on developers to do it at the site scale. If you do it regionally, you get major economies of scale that you just can't get site by site. Conservation-oriented water rate structures. This is a fancy way of saying reduce your tap fees for lower water use. And that's a huge incentive for developers to take this on. Public demonstration projects for water innovation. Denver Water is a great example of this. They put their money where their mouth is, and they actually develop some of the strategies like water reuse to show that it works. Public education for water conservation. Denver Water also does a great job for this. You can see billboards all around town talking about water conservation, which is really exciting. And collaborating across sectors to address drought. This is critical not just for the water utilities and planners, but also elected officials, developers, land use consultants. All of these people can work together and tackle these problems together. In terms of key takeaways, the overall lessons that we learned from this report are that saving water saves money and generates long-term value for real estate assets, communities, and the environment, and that by working together on water conservation, efficiency, and reuse, we can protect our water future, despite projected water shortages, population increases, and climate change. So thank you all for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, Bill Wank.
Thank you. So I've been really obsessed, maybe that's too strong a word, with a study that was done that I read about recently, where every year the water that evaporates from Lake Mead and Lake Powell is enough, or is 5 times the volume of water that Denver uses annually. So I've wondered, okay, if we had that water, first of all, how would we capture that water? And essentially, you have to use it where it falls. And I've been practicing for 40 years, And I've been wondering, how can we go beyond the notion of site-scale green infrastructure? And we've had some great presentations here. And I think we're well along, and we've really developed that to a degree that it's really quite effective. But this presentation that I'm going to give you is about what I think of as a district scale of stormwater management. I like to call it reinventing the storm drain. How do we rethink some of the basic systems that we put in place in the city, quite often without even thinking about them, assuming that's just the way we do it? So, see if this works. On your left, this is a sketch of what a typical small watershed does. Water comes down, it infiltrates, and it supports that watershed. You know, the riparian forests, the stream flows that you see are maintained by groundwater that infiltrates. When we develop, can you hear me if I walk away from it? I tend to move around a little bit.
Wireless mic?
No. I'll just talk. No. Oh, okay. I will behave. The middle image is your typical stormwater plumbing system of a city. Water falls on the streets and moves into the river, which destabilizes the river, and the water moves quickly downstream into one of those reservoirs to evaporate. It's water law. We'll talk about that later. On the right is what I think of as a hybrid. Stormwater piping isn't necessarily bad, but it's not the only part of what I think is a resilient system. So you store water integral with this urban fabric. You store it along and adjacent to the city. And in the process, you begin to heal the groundwater regime and the watershed itself. So that hybrid, I think, is the way we need to start to think about our engineered systems, urban stormwater systems. I can't go back. I won't even try that. I'm going to show you a series of systems that are private, public, and then public-private, because I think the ultimate goal ought to be that the city works with private development to create the whole notion of one water, because I think that's one of the key ideas that come out of the Urban Land Institute's plan. This is Taxi in the city of Denver. The colored building there there's a very old image, is of a campus, what is now a campus of mixed-use mid-rise buildings in the old industrial area of the city. This is a diagram of the surface stormwater system on the campus today, so that the different colors of green essentially are both site landscape, about 10% of the site, and most of you, if you're a city planner, you mandate you got to have 10% landscape. Well, stormwater takes about an equal amount of space on a site. So when you integrate the two, you end up with what we call a multifunctional system of stormwater landscapes that just permeate and create the site plan. This is totally surface parked. It's a mid-rise, medium-density, mixed-use development. Okay? It has just one piece of subsurface stormwater piping. The rest is surface. And these are images of the first phase that has matured quite a bit. As planners, you're going to have to involve your city engineers because the standards need to change slightly. This grate here replace subsurface piping. The site has very little, if any, curb and gutter. A lot of soft materials here. The walkways are actually integral with the drives. You know, it's now called a complete street. This is 20 years old. So that notion of these multi-purpose, multifunctional systems within a site, I think are basic to how we try to think about everything we do in the office. This is the kind of the central park plan for the Lowry community in Denver. Most of you know what Lowry is, old Air Force Base, 1,000 acres, mixed-use community. The park also serves as a district-scale stormwater management facility. The park's link, you can see one large flood control reservoir here. Another one is off, actually it's up there. It was originally linked by a subsurface pipe. The creek was daylighted. You can see it through here. And the image on the right diagrams here and here, the district scale stormwater, I walked away, I'm sorry. District scale stormwater management facilities, the largest green bubble really manages stormwater from the town center, the entire town center, which is probably 50, 60 acres. What it does then is open up more land for development. Remember that 10% of each site that has to go for stormwater management? Nope, now it's in the park. So the parks, the civic landscapes become integral to the function and the development potential of the private. That sort of public-private collaboration is actually on developments this large is pretty easy because there's about 25% open space typically that will happen on planned communities like that. Quite easy. The key, I think, is that you look at parks differently, that you have just enough bluegrass to meet those sorts of public needs for, in this case, a taekwondo class that adopted, this is the terminus of 6th Avenue. So they come there and they have their practice. The rest of it, at least 50%, and this is a major community park on the site, is native or adaptive low water use plants. You can see Westerly Creek here in the foreground. Also, these large flood control dams. This dam is about 50 feet high. It's created one of the largest wetlands in Denver. We had mountains of rubble that we had to do away with, a store on site from demolition of the runways. So we used them to create universally accessible ramps to the top of the dam to create one of the most popular walkways in the community. So we solved a problem at reduced cost and made infrastructure multifunctional and an asset and amenity to the community. Again, that sort of, no one thing should serve a sole purpose, and it should add value to the community, in my mind. And this is a view of Westerly Creek and a small pond. On the right, the upper right, is that water quality wetland that manages stormwater out of the town center. It's probably one of the more popular areas in the park for walking, dog walking. It's rich with wildlife. It's a great diverse habitat in the community. And I think we now need to think of these not just as simply functional things, but as really important to kind of the quality and diversity of recreational opportunities in a community. I'm going to wrap up with the redevelopment of Elitch Gardens in central Denver. You know Elitch is, you've ridden the, whatever it is, I haven't, the roller coaster, but for those of you that don't, Spear Boulevard is here, Pepsi Center, I-25 at the top. It will become an urban district in Denver. On the right is the stormwater diagram. The streets are now integrally an integral part of the stormwater system. They're porous pavement. Green roofs are integral to the concept. And you see along the river, another, which is that blue line at the top, is another one of those stormwater management areas. So the water infiltrates, back to that original idea, infiltrates into the soil and moves to the river as groundwater, and if it doesn't, at least some of it is captured along the river to create a functioning floodplain. So By doing this, you can eliminate most of the stormwater piping from a highly urban district. So the goal here is to reinvent not just the storm drain, but the system. And in doing so, we really not only, I think, make for a more efficient system, but I think a much better river over the long term. I think that's it. No, a couple more. I forgot to mention the streets. They are complete streets, multimodal, stormwater function in the landscape areas. Let's see what else, and the river itself. A series of riparian terraces so that you get stormwater storage and really do start to restore the river as a functioning natural system. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Brock. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm here today predominantly to talk about how Sterling Ranch, we talked a lot about how water demand management is an important part of development. Our development would not have been possible without it. So we've kind of served as a success story in it, and I'm here to talk about the tools that we've done to implement it as we, thank you.
A little taller than
Perfect. No worries. How we've implemented it to create a successful community. So the first several slides here are just pictures of the overall master plan. We're right next against the foothills, so we have very breathtaking views, and we've been able to implement, as you can see, a wide variety of plant material to create a beautiful landscape. This is our front entrance. Our office building is right there on the right. I'm in there every day. This is our first rec center, so pools are not really popular right now with this crowd, but we still have them. So I think it's important to balance water demand with what amenities people want. So I'm president of our development company. I also sit on the Water and Sewer Board for a district that was a developer-initiated district that built the entire water wastewater system for Sterling Ranch. So Sterling Ranch is located in Douglas County, right next to Chatfield Reservoir, about 15 miles to southwest of the Denver Metro. It's 3,400 acres, zoned for 12,050 units. About a third will be open space. As of the end of this month, we have 1,500 occupied homes, so it's certainly in its infancy, but we've sold over 3,000 lots to home builders and multifamily developers, so we're about a third of the way through. So as far as water, land, and return on investment, there's Colorado's 80-20 rule, which is 80% of the water is on west of the Continental Divide, where there's 20% of the population, 20% of the water on the east side of the Continental Divide, where there's 80% of the population. So water is extremely important for growth in the Front Range. This map is a map of Douglas County. It's a county of 372,000 people. It was developed almost entirely on aquifer water. So they've been using a finite resource to grow that entire population base, and now those districts are converting to renewable water. For Sterling Ranch and for Dominion, we had to commit in order to get our zoning through Douglas County to be a minimum of 70% renewable at full. Will most likely be between 70 and 90%, and we've been able to use groundwater as a resiliency tactic for drought management, as well as aquifer storage and recovery. So it's a little unique, and a combined renewable groundwater system is a conjunctive use system. What's a little unique is that groundwater is about a factor of 10 less expensive than surface water, both in the water rights acquisition and in the infrastructure to deliver it. And so what we're seeing is Castle Rock and Parker, Centennial, which is Highlands Ranch, as well as Castle Pines, they're all having to do this conversion. And we started with our tap fees being at the highest end of kind of the Douglas County region, and we've slowly watched those districts have come up to be in line with us. But as far as aligned incentives of land development and water conservation, the land for a land developer like ourselves is a residual of purchase price of the house. So the higher the tap fee, the lower the land residual to the land seller. And so we've intentionally been very conscientious about how we could reduce the amount of water we have to provide make a very resilient system so that we're not relying on any given source, but to offer the lowest cost to our customers as possible. So this shows what some of those successes look like. So the chart here is all of our different water sources. The trend line that you see is our actual anticipated demand. We've been able to shave off about 1,500 acre-feet-ish of water supplies that, for our current density that we expect will grow over time, which equated to about a $60 million infrastructure savings for our residents. We use water to extinction, so we will actually be building a wastewater treatment plant and using effluent in our system. We're also the first and the state's only rainwater harvesting municipal system that we are allowed to do. We'll actually be adjudicating a rainwater rate, the first one in the state, between 2022 and 2026. We expect that that's about 500 acre-feet. With our demands, that would be, I believe, enough for about 1,500 homes worth of water. So the tools that we've used to be water-wise is both in the land plan design, kind of in Bill's area of expertise. We also have a diversity of housing that is becoming more prevalent in the suburbs, landscape and lot design, technology, and an effective rate structure. So in talking about success, our average consumption per residential unit is 0.17 acre-feet. The average in the metro area is about 0.4, so it's less than 50%. That's about 55,000 gallons per home, 45% lower than the average MSA, and then that's actually 26% lower than what the CWB's state water plan called for by 2050. And we've been able to accomplish that predominantly with a variety of housing. You know, there's not one size fits all. Not everyone wants to live in an apartment building, just like not everyone can afford this house, which is sold for about $1.5 million. So there's a broad diversity of housing across the project, and we've been able to use that to achieve water conservation. An example of that is lots that are greater than 5,000 square feet we define as a large lot. The average water consumption there is about 0.2 acre-feet, with about 60% being used on an indoor usage, about 40% outdoor. On lots smaller than 5,000 square feet on a single-family detached unit, as well as attached, it's 0.136 acre-feet. So you see that there's a dramatic cost savings water savings by lot size, and the indoor water usage goes up from 60% to 2/3. Why is that important? Because we're building an effluent system to discharge our treated effluent in the South Platte and intake upstream. Any indoor water usage we get to use to extinction. So we're able to reuse that water as many times as we can through our system. On landscape, we worked with Bill as well as the Denver Botanic Gardens back in the day and the CWCB to come up with different landscape palettes for the entire master plan. There's quite a bit of homeowner education that goes on to educate them on how to design their landscape palettes for their front and backyards. Every landscape plan comes into a design review committee for review and approval. Those landscape plans have irrigation budgets based on the lot size. There is no one size fits all. There are a lot of municipalities in Denver that are banning grass altogether. I personally, as a personal perspective, not always shared even among our team, that grass is not always the enemy. I think it makes sense in limited applications. We're not Arizona, we're not New Mexico, we're not completely a desert. And so having limited, tasteful applications of it breaks up some of the landscaping that you have and differentiates Colorado from the desert climates. These are just some sample landscapes that have been installed in homeowners' yards, so you can kind of see the diversity of landscape that we have. Obviously, you're starting to see artificial turf become prevalent as well. And one of the things we've been able to do with our rate structure is allow market dynamics to take place. So, for example, this homeowner on the left probably elected to save $60 a month. They didn't want bluegrass in their backyard, which is fine. The market, if people are paying for the water they use, I think they can make their own informed decisions. These are some other examples, so you can see we do have grass in backyards. We have not banned them. Like some of Castle Rock and Aurora have now banned grass in backyards pretty much altogether. Technology has also certainly enabled us to achieve these water reductions. We do have dual water meters that are read in 15-minute intervals. That allows us to appropriately bill what homeowners are using indoor versus outdoor. Since outdoor water usage is a system loss to our system, we're not able to reuse it. It has a significantly higher rate, and I'll point that out on the next slide. We also use Ratio, which is a Colorado-based company that had a large investment from Amazon that does predictive irrigation cycles based on weather. So it ties into a nearby weather station, and actually we have graphs that show it's been able to correlate outdoor irrigation almost perfectly with temperature. We also have a partnership with a company called Copper Labs and it provides homeowners in near real time what their water consumption is, as well as electric and gas, and it allows something called predictive analytics that tells you what your bill will be at the end of the month based on current consumption patterns. And then we do require, before the state required it, we have required low flow fixtures in all of our houses since 2015. I think effective rate structures also played a huge role. Water is not cheap in Sterling Ranch. We expect people to pay for what it actually costs to deliver it. These show lot sizes on the left, as well as what water budgets they're given. When a homeowner comes in, buys a house, typically the home builder installs the front yard landscaping. The backyard landscaping is on the homeowner to install typically. They will present a landscape plan based on their lot size. They can come up with what their water budget is, and then we have 2 landscape architects who look to make sure that conceptually that plan will come within its budget. And then on the rate side, we have tiers. If you come in under 80% of your water budget, you are in tier 1. If you're 80 to 100%, you're tier 2. And then if you go substantially over, you hit into these other tiers. And you'll notice that on the outdoor rates, it actually doubles from tier 1 to tier 3, and it's almost triple by tier 4. So ultimately, we found that WaterWise works. We've seen resiliency in our system. We've also seen the market adjust to the real cost of water in Colorado. And ultimately, I'll end with there's aligned incentives between developers and water conservation, going back to that land is a residual of purchase price. To the extent you can lower the cost of delivery of water, it ultimately drops our bottom line. So it's ultimately been a very successful project, and we look forward to continuing it through build-up. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to our panelists today. I think we can see a lot of messages kind of coming through again and again around how we're able to design communities in such a way that achieves multiple benefits and, works to restore some of the natural systems or work better, more in concert with nature, to reduce water use, and to better utilize our stormwater. So, I jotted down something that Bill mentioned, the various benefits to many of the projects that he showed, all of the projects he showed, which were that, they solved a problem, they reduced cost, they made infrastructure multifunctional, and they added value to the community. And then so much of that was played out in what Brock mentioned. And so I'd love to open it up to the audience, to questions for Marianne. The Urban Land Institute works with many developers and consultants that are motivated to reduce water use and manage stormwater better, and also to our other panelists. So do I have any questions from the audience? Oh, great. I took this job again, sorry. I like to run around apparently.
This is a question for Brock. Could you talk about how you adjudicated the water rights from rainwater harvesting and how that works?
This is my exercise for the day.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. So we piloted several different pilot projects with the Colorado Water Conservation Board back in 2009 and worked with the legislature to pass 2 bills to allow it. It had actually been, rainwater harvesting had been outlawed since the 70s. As part of that, we had to basically put flumes in different drainage basins across the undeveloped Sterling Ranch to come up with, and a weather monitoring station that basically would give precip analysis over the entire land assemblage, and then we would measure how much flow left the undeveloped state. And that came up about 97% of the precip did not leave the site. The vegetation actually captured most of that rainwater and snowmelt. So that was the first step. Once the legislature changed the law, we have been taking data continuously of our stormwater. Again, what is the impervious surfaces across a property, how much drainage is that creating, and then the delta between what would historically make it to the river in the undeveloped state and what is making it to the river in the developed state is what we can capture. And so we'll be going into water court with that data and adjudicating it over about a 2-year period. I believe we'll be back in front of the legislature again to change the law because they created some incompatible components of it with a stormwater management bill in 2018. So we'll be probably working with the legislature this year on that.
Can I add something? I think a lot of the images, certainly that I showed, and I really have to applaud Brock and his group because they took on an issue that needed to be tested. And I think you're going to see more and more of that under current water law, you can't do what we showed. There are protocols that the Urban Drainage District in Denver, Mile High Flood Control District, allows infiltration of stormwater within 72 hours as long as you don't plant water-consumptive plant materials. So they're edging toward some sort of compromise with current water law, but I think it has to go much further.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, there's one in the back. Anna, would you mind running this back for me?
Was it?
Is that a question for Bill? Yeah. Bill, in using the lid techniques you used in Lowry or the taxi cab development, is there a specific design storm? Are you able to fully treat both in terms of volume and water quality, a 100-year storm using the lid techniques, or is it a combination of conventional and lid?
The question, as I heard it, is there a certain water quality capture volume? And it varies. We've done projects that have, I guess so. Thank you. Could you all hear that intro? The question was, what are the water quality capture volumes? And they really vary. The Lowry was the kind of the minimum volume, I think, and quite often, and in the case of Lowry, we'll size it to retain and infiltrate roughly 12 inches or less. So these are very shallow facilities. We did one in Milwaukee that retained and infiltrated the 100-year storm event. So it depends on the land volume, land area, better word, that you have, and I think more is better. In Milwaukee, the site was originally a very large marsh that had been industrialized. So the goal would be to replicate the pre-development hydrology of the site, I think, or more if you can, because I think the goal here is to replicate that hydrology to the degree possible. And some cities are moving toward that. Douglas County is, so I think it's interesting times, stormwater times.
That's great. I have a question while others are thinking about their questions. You know, I'm really motivated to better understand how can we bridge the gap between the public sector and the private sector on the development of these approaches. You know, what have your experiences been, or what would you recommend to, you know, the land use planners out there that are working in, you know, a city or county about, you know, if they want to see the types of developments and projects that you've shown, how do they bridge that gap?
I'm just going to put in a quick plug. We're actually developing a Waterwise Development Coalition for that exact purpose. So it's open to anyone. Anyone in this room is welcome to, we have a survey. Basically, it's just a really quick survey saying you're interested, and I'll add you to our email list, and we'll do quarterly virtual meetings. Super simple and easy, but you'll be able to join these virtual meetings with people across all these sectors to talk through, okay, how do we actually implement this at the local level? Like, what are the barriers? What are the opportunities? And how can we learn from each other? Because I do think there's a huge gap. We have, you know, public sector folks who think developers are evil, and we have developers who think the public sector people don't know what they're talking about. So how do we bring them together and really talk these things through? Because it's going to take a lot of collaboration.
I don't think there are many good models for the sort of hybrid public-private, and I like to call them facilities, because they aren't necessarily parks. They hopefully are multifunctional in some way, and they require special types of management. And there aren't many entities that I know of other than special districts. For example, Brock has a special district that manages your open spaces and probably do a lot of the maintenance. And you can manage it according to the particular requirements of whatever that facility it is whether it's a park or a stormwater facility or a combination thereof, or streets or whatever. Most cities don't have that sort of integrated system of management. Even more complex is ownership. If you work on a municipal scale and you have those facilities, who ultimately is going to own them and take responsibility for them? Because with the Elish Gardens site, taking private water that flows off of the new neighborhood that will be there and infiltrating it on public land, which is the river, is something that just doesn't occur, you know, because cities don't want to take on the liability and the responsibility for in this case, the stormwater of the private sector. But I think we have to think more holistically against that notion, again, that notion of one water. So I want to see those models.
I want to hear Brock's
I'm going to move a little bit of an interesting perspective. We've been working for 3.5 years now to reduce our water demand standards. So when we started development, you were required in Douglas County, unincorporated Douglas County, to reserve 3/4 of an acre foot per home per year, which is almost double the average usage in Denver. And that was there because it was conservative, and since the county developed an aquifer water, that was assumed that would provide the 100-year groundwater supply necessary for new development on groundwater. We appealed that. We actually went through 4 years of litigation over that, down from 0.75 to 0.4. We had a neighborhood opposition group that sued the county, saying they abused their discretion to approve our zoning with that reduction. And then we are in the process, in 2 weeks, we'll be reducing it from 0.4 to 0.26 to actually recognize the gains that we've made. And I will say, I think for planners and municipalities, I think it's important to let the data kind of dictate what planning numbers you're willing to look at for water use, because, you know, the old mentality has been, if we overestimate how much water we need on the demand side, then that takes into account the supply variations based on hydrologic cycles. And we've combated that, where the county has actually made us pretty much have a firm yield supply on the supply side, but then also at a conservative demand standard. And so we've combated that between the private and public sectors, and I think that letting the data and taking kind of the historical way of doing things out of it will help continue to drive water conservation. So.
Great, thank you. Let's put it back out to the audience for another question. Great. Our sponsor.
Yeah, this question is for Brock. I guess I'm interested in what prompted you to go down all of this path to begin with. It's a lot that you took on, and I just wonder what was the original motivation.
Good question. I wonder sometimes myself. No. Effectively, Sterling Ranch didn't develop when Highlands Ranch was developing because the aquifer underneath us is not sufficient to support development. So the rest of Douglas County developed. We were kind of a donut hole in that area. And my parents have been working on this for probably 22 years now at this point, but so long time horizon. But in order to make up that difference, is the cost difference from groundwater to renewable water. Groundwater rate in Douglas County probably is anywhere from $2,500 to $4,000 an acre foot. Aurora just bought a renewable water rate on Deer Creek for $35,000 an acre foot. So it's literally 10 times more expensive. And we were kind of at a competitive disadvantage in the sense that Castle Rock and Parker they're getting renewable water systems over the next 40 years, but they're still groundwater based today. And so the only way to make this whole thing financially viable was to build a really efficient water system. And so we kind of had to look at it of, okay, the only way that this works is to do it this way, and we're gonna have to figure it out. And we figured it out. We wouldn't have been, and I mean what I said when I started, we wouldn't have been able to develop Sterling Ranch without water demand management and building a cost-effective system. So.
We probably have time for one more quick question before we wrap up, if there is one out there. Okay. Oh, Bill.
Before you all go, I want to pitch a book that talks about the project you saw and more. And you 30% off special today from the publisher. You can pick up a sheet here, and there's a QR code. You can scan it. It'll take you to the publisher.
And I have it, and it's filled with beautiful renderings, so I recommend it.
Great, and Marianne, I have your slide as well if you want to wrap us up with some of your upcoming programs at ULI.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So this is the WaterWise Coalition that I mentioned earlier. If you're interested, just shoot us an email at that email address or my email address, which is just marianne.epig@uli.org. And we have fall meeting coming up in October for ULI. This is our global twice-a-year event, one in fall, one in spring. We cover a lot of resilience issues at these meetings. So if you're interested in learning more, take a look at the ULI Fall Meeting agenda, and we also have a coastal forum. I'm not sure that's super relevant for Colorado, but yeah. Yeah, and feel free, if you have more questions, to reach out to us afterwards.
Great, and I'll just mention that if you're interested in some of the resources that Growing Water Smart offers, please see growingwatersmart.org. And the Sonoran Institute is hiring, so talk to me. I'm here today and tomorrow if you're at all interested in doing more work on these issues. So with that, I think I'll just close it by again thanking our esteemed panelists and thanking you all. And I believe we're on a 15-minute break, and if you want to get more of these water and land use issues, there's one more session after this. Thank you.